Loving God, on this Christmas morning, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our salvation. Please be seated. Well, I shan't be long. We haven't unpacked our Christmas stockings at home yet, and there's breakfast being prepared for me. We already had our Christmas dinner. We did that on the 23rd. What a convenient day on a Sunday afternoon to have Christmas. And I know each of you come this day with particular stories of Christmases, memories of Christmases past, thoughts about what is yet to unfold later today. Particulars somehow help us to grasp Christmas and its meaning. But our readings today also invite us to look at a much larger story. The letter writer to the Hebrews begins that letter in kind of an unusual way for an epistle. He starts, long ago, God spoke to our ancestors in many and various ways by the prophets. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by a Son. There are in those two verses, two invitations I hear for us today. One, by opening it up so broadly, God spoke to our ancestors. Can you imagine, as the people opened that letter, how many different stories of the ancient prophets sprang to their mind? It's like an invitation for those stories, those things that are meaningful and particular to us, to enter into this great story. And while it draws us back, in a sense, it is also an invitation to see Christmas in this broad scope of history. Even as the letter writer to the Hebrews says, in these last days. Surely, if Christ's birth 2,000 years ago was a part of the last days, so too 2018 and going into 2019 is a part of the great unfolding that is spoken of in Scripture. The prologue to John's Gospel, which I read, invites us into that vast sweep, going back even before the prophets. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God, and all things came into being through him. And without him, not one thing came into being. We are taken back to before time, to when all there was God. God is community of Trinity. In that moment in time, when God creates out of nothing but God's sheer love, God's community, God makes all that there is. and says that it is good. And then in that precious moment, the Word became flesh and lived among us. Those particulars of Jesus' coming into human flesh. Those stories of Mary and Joseph and the shepherds and the wise men and Herod and all that took place. Real and concrete. And yet, still just a part of this grand narrative of the divine and creation coming together. That is one of the invitations of Christmas. To be attentive, to be mindful, to be reflective, to be active in seeing how God in the Word becomes flesh. And as we approach the end of this year and turning to 2019, we undoubtedly will be doing some reflecting. I did a little bit asking myself, where in the last year have I sensed God becoming flesh? I think of one particular morning when I entered into the breakfast room where the hungry come and are fed. And oftentimes before I open that door, I feel a little bit of anxiety in my stomach. I don't know what is going to face me that day. And often a prayer comes to me, just let me be present. And on this particular morning, I sat with a man across the table from me. We started to share, to talk. Just small talk, nothing amazing. And oftentimes I've entered into that room and think of stories of people who say they see the face of Christ in the other. And I haven't had that experience. But on that particular morning, as I talked to him and listened, and we shared, it was like an illuminated moment. I didn't see a flash of light, but there was a brightness that said, Christ is present in that encounter, in that relationship. I don't think he saw my face glow. I didn't see his face glow. But in that human connection, God was present. And I saw it again later in the year at the convention center in Hamilton. The Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness was having their annual conference, and there were 1,300 people gathered in a common cause to end the blight of homelessness in Canada. And just being in a room with so many people with a common and just cause of reaching into the world just as Christ did 2,000 years ago, with a mission to change the world, to recreate, to inaugurate a new creation. So to this gathering, there was a palpable sense of the divine being present in the flesh. And how could I think of Christmas conscious of the people who are gathered here and the circumstances of their particular lives, and not be drawn back to my dear friend Jean Archbell, a colleague with whom I was ordained, who left this fleshly existence earlier in the year to be with her God in death. And that text I sent to her husband Dave this morning, reminding him of how Jean loves St. Francis, the one who introduced the nativity scene to the church. So fleshly, so real, so concrete. In that moment, God was made flesh, dying and rising. Those are historic events, moments in the past year where I sense God's presence, and I'm sure you can fill in all sorts of blanks with your own stories. But I turn once again to the gospel. But to all who received him, who believe in his name, he gave power to become children of God, who were born not of blood or of the will of the flesh or of the will of man, but of God. These words are filled with hope for the future. For we are children of God. We will leave this place going into the world, longing to know God's presence. We are invited to be a part with the Creator of bringing about a new creation. So how will the Word be made flesh in the year ahead? It will involve you and I. How will new creation come forth? Where is the hope? Look at the insert in your leaflet for signs of hope in this community of faith. I looked at my email this morning. Someone said, "I'm sorry I missed you yesterday at the 4:00 service. Merry Christmas. Looking forward to all the wonderful potential of next year." I think of Revive starting again, and people searching to grow in their faith and seeing Scripture unfold in their lives. I see in the church a desire to continue to build relationships with other churches, with the wider community here among us. Where is the hope? I anticipate it in just a few moments as we share in those creatures of bread and wine, where God promises to enter into them and they become Christ's body, his flesh, and we will receive them and be welcomed in to this great drama of the incarnation. The Word becomes flesh and dwells in us and among us. Thanks be to God.